Well, it's with great pride that I introduce Dr. Charlie Kaplan. He and I met at a social work conference for Latinos. I think we were the only Jewish people there, or only white people there. Nevertheless, he's going to speak today about supportive services for child Holocaust survivors. He recently retired as a research professor, Associate Dean of Research, and Interim Director of the Roybal Center of Aging at the USC Suzanne, Dworak, Peck School of Social Work. His continuing research has been on applied research on human service implementation on the survivors of extreme situations such as genocide, torture, political refugees, and heroin addiction. He conducted an evaluation of a training program for trauma-informed therapy for child Holocaust survivors with the Jewish Family Services of Los Angeles. His training as an applied sociologist began with doctoral studies at UCLA, supported by a National Institute of General Medical Traineeship. So, with our pleasure, Dr. Kaplan. Either. They're both on.
Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege for me to be here today with my generation, that we're still learning and communicating together. And I'm retired, like I guess most of you are as well. But I still keep my mind active, and I still am involved with the research line that I developed at the School of Social Work at USC. And I used this opportunity to sort of look back to what I had been doing for the last 10 years or so at USC, and what I'm continuing to do with some of the people that I worked with at USC School of Social Work. School of Social Work is very committed to trauma and providing services for all sorts of groups that have experienced trauma. And Eileen mentioned how we met at a Latino mental health social work conference, which I also was working with a program there that works in the MacArthur Park area, and you might have been hearing about the drug and violence situation in MacArthur Park. And I presented at that conference. Eileen was there, and we were like kind of the two only non-Hispanics, and then all of a sudden, she told me about this program, and I said, oh, well, I'm also doing some very Jewish related research on trauma, and I still continue that after retirement, so she invited me to come here. I was supposed to talk a year or so ago, but I had some health issues, so I had to postpone it, and now I'm back and doing a little bit more than I originally intended to do, because I'm pretty excited about a new project that I'm working on, which is the Jews of Color Project, which is an interesting movement that's going on in the Jewish community. But I specifically welcome the opportunity to present this research line to the Jewish community. Both groups that studies that I'll talk about involve aging Jewish populations of different sorts, and the kind of traumas that they deal with, and what kind of person-centered approaches. And I think that's very important to realize. having services that are person-centered, that start with the person as an individual, as a concrete human being with many different things going. And you have to start there, and you have to start with the story. We've heard in the first presentation the importance of stories. Well, for us social workers, and that's what we try to teach, the story of the person that we're trying to provide services is the starting point, and that must be the center. So we think and we assume we know a lot about the Jewish community, and because we are Jews, but when you actually talk to different populations, the variation among the Jewish people is immense. And the traumas experienced are very, very complex, as we all know. So I use this opportunity to try to put everything down on slides. It's very academic. I don't want to capture you with one slide after another. I have 25 slides here. I liked what our first presenter did with having opportunity to talk. So if something hits you, like you want to interrupt me, I'm very pleased to have a general discussion or a discussion around a particular slide, and then we can go on. And if we run out of time, we run out of time. I'm not looking at this as a scientific presentation, but an opportunity to present what we have been doing and still do at USC that is of interest to the Jewish community and the Jewish people. So let's see. Yeah, here's the... Is it on? Well, let me first start the group. Ralph Margolin was my research assistant for when I was at USC for about 5 years, and he's now. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Is this better? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Eugene Weiss, Sarah Schwartz are professors at social work at USC. And Vivian Sauer is a former professor, clinical professor of social work at USC. So this is the team that I've been working with for these years. So what is the problem that we're working on? Well, genocidal and anti-Semitic trauma is a persistent, wicked problem in the modern world. I mean, the Holocaust is one of the milestones of us moving history from what some sociologists have said, from the second industrial revolution, the assembly lines, to the third industrial revolution. You have the Holocaust on one hand, and you have the atomic bomb on the other that has changed the whole world, where technology now can lead to the elimination of humanity and the obsolescence of humanity. So that's why it's a very wicked problem, and that's why the Holocaust keeps on coming back, especially among the Jewish people. So there's a persistent need for a person-centered. I went and talked about that. Another point that we've learned, that while extensive services have been given to Holocaust survivors as they aged, but more attention is needed for the multi-generation and the families that the Holocaust survivors have generated, because there is understanding of the intergenerational transfer of the trauma. And so this is an area that needs attention. And then the point that I made earlier, that the voices and experience of the clients, the survivors themselves, or the Jews of color themselves, is the starting point of providing services, and is the starting point of the researches that's necessary to inform these services. Okay, so there's 2 studies. I won't get to all of it, like I said, 25, but the first study is a women childhood survivor project. So this was a project that was a program evaluation from 2015 to 2017 of the Jewish Family Services of Los Angeles site, administered by the Center for Advancing Holocaust Survivor Care, which is a national center that provides support for Holocaust survivor care. And this program was a multi-site national program sponsored by the funds were flow through to the Center for Advancing Holocaust Survivor Care that was given to the site of Los Angeles. There were other sites in other parts of the country that did it a little differently. But interesting enough, it was supported by the U.S. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration to transform Holocaust service organizations through a trauma-informed approach. And that's actually the presentation that I made at the Hispanic conference was also funded by SAMHSA to provide trauma-informed services to adolescents who experience gang violence, domestic violence, and drug problems. This study was an evaluation that the Roybal Center is a center of aging at USC Social Work. And they were given, and I was the interim director at the time, a grant to do the evaluation part of this study. Or of this, it wasn't a study, but the services. So the grant was really to provide training to the whole organization, the Jewish Family Services of Los Angeles, to create that organization as a trauma-informed workforce skills. And that included case management, nutrition, support, and security services. But
the people that are watching it on Zoom say you're not speaking into the mic so that they can't get it.
oh, okay. I'm so sorry. All right. Okay, the second study is a study of the Jews of color. And it comes out of a national survey that was done of the Jewish community. Thank you. Of the American Jewish population. It was called Beyond the Count. So this survey of the American Jewish population had certain demographic characteristics and characteristics of the population. And these numbers were used to make policies for Jewish services. However, the title Beyond the Count says there are certain emerging groups within the Jewish community that were not represented in the way the data was collected on the national survey. So a study was commissioned by the Jews of Color Initiative, which was a community-based national initiative, organization that represented the interests of the Jewish community. And this Beyond the Count survey, was mainly a quantitative survey of Jews of color, but it showed that 52% of the study sample were young, were 20 or 30. So this was mainly a younger movement that was happening within the Jewish community of 20 and 30-year-olds. But there was a need for the are there any older Jews of color, over 50 or so? And that's what this study was to see as a national convenience sample of Jews of color that were over 50. And in the Beyond the Count, remembering the Holocaust was considered very important for Jewish identity for 65%, more than celebrating Jewish holidays, which was 61%, and just slightly less than transmitting Jewish identity to the next generation. So this is just to indicate how important trauma is, and specifically the Holocaust trauma is to being Jewish and identifying as Jewish. So we conducted intensive biographical qualitative research of a small sample of Jews of color. I'll skip the methodology, but the methodology for the Woman Childhood Survivor Project, these were childhood survivors, that is, survivors of the Holocaust that were children when they experienced it, not adults, because there's been differences found that children who experienced the Holocaust, their brains had not developed yet, and the long-term effect of the Holocaust is different than those who experienced it when they were adults. So this particular services that we were studying studied these child Holocaust survivors, both women and men. So we had recordings of 3 focus groups, one with clients, one with the case managers, and one with the dietary staff. And we had spot observations of Cafe Europa. How many here have heard of Cafe Europa? Yeah. So this is a long-standing program that was set up after the Second World War for immigrants, and it's still ongoing and a very vital resource for the Jewish community. And the methodology for the Jews of color, I'll skip over that, was this biographical research. This is qualitative narrative interviews. So let's go over the findings from the clients in the child Holocaust evaluation. So the Cafe Europa was greatly valued. It was, like I said, it was a precious resource to the community. It was a continuous occasion for the Holocaust survivors to meet, to find pleasure and be entertained. But it was also, which was really important, a staging area for child Holocaust survivor clients to reach out to the younger generations, especially, as well as the community. So the Cafe Europa also was an important staging area for this survivor group. And it provided an occasion on a very daily way to bear witness to the genocide, not without being overwhelmed, however. So this is too much to read in one slide, but this is an example of one of the quotes from the focus groups, where it expresses their gratitude for the Cafe Europa, and it also, the Yiddish is important. To say Nahur von Eikazer is dankbar, which indicated there was a strong Yiddish component to these women, childhood survivors. And here's one of the more complex findings of the study, which is very hard to process, I think, and shows the complex emotions. In this brief exchange between two participants in the focus group, you see, what do black people have to do with Jewish? Honey, they are helping everybody. They are humane. It's a humane society. And in fact, in that Beyond the Count study, the value that's highest among American Jews is this charity, this helping of others. But then the second said, well, it's helping everybody. They are humane. It's a humane society. So why don't they have a different title? She said. So in the first part, you have P2 is expressing the emotion of pride in what the Jewish people do for the world. The second one is that, well, if they're giving funds to, why are they called to other people than Jews? Why are they called the Jewish Family Service? And then she expresses that, to be very honest, because it was hard, that she feels resentful for that. And then poses the question, how many black people organizations donate anything or are helping Jewish people? So this is just indicative of the complexity that we found in the clients. The case managers, I won't, but complex emotions, again, play a very strong place. The case managers have to deal with a strong sense of entitlement, that the child Holocaust survivors really feel that they are entitled to as much support as they can get for what they went through. And this sometimes makes the work challenging for a social worker who's a case manager. But on the other hand, the ambivalence is that this is a highly valued, honorable work. And then they also found financial guidelines can re-traumatize, because the case managers often have to say no to requests for additional support from the clients. And there's confusion about the claims conference, the reparations, how they're administered, where's the money going, et cetera, et cetera. And one thing the case managers have to get to this person-centered, that everyone is unique. And while many of the clients have tragic stories, you would suppose, others have good memories, which you wouldn't think in this experience. Another interesting finding was that the clients had a fear of something being taken away, and food hoarding and focus on food was a common behavior that the case managers had to do. And they had to be sensitive to any change can trigger a reaction. Adult children of survivors need to be recognized, the needs of, that's what I was saying, the other generations and the transfer of the trauma. When you're talking about paperwork and official letters, and you have to be very careful. This is what the case managers were expressing in their focus group. So, but we also looked at the transportation and dietary staff. Well, you say, what do they have to do? What do they have to do with an organization? Well, the training was to have the whole organization, not only the case managers, transform. So the dietary staff and the transportation staff are also involved in interacting with the survivors. So I won't go over all of the different findings, but the recommendations also, continued confusion about funding sources and guidelines for funds. So there was a need for a simple reference that they could find out how to do. I won't go over each one. Intensity of discussion around shared stories of trauma. So it was very important, even though they tell the stories, that an individual, there was an opportunity for them individually to talk to a person. So also the case managers felt a need for self-care because it's very difficult on a daily basis to work with this population, and they need a strong focus on the countertransference. The emotions that go back and forth were important. They also wanted more Holocaust education, particularly for new case managers, which involved experts coming and survivor story documentaries like the Shoah Foundation at USC has. Transportation staff also wanted sensitivity training in dealing with the population and their families, because they often, when picking up or dropping off, they had to directly interact with the families. And more education, like the caseworkers, and tours of the Holocaust Museum. So I'll switch quickly to the Jews of color. Is there any questions or comments so far on this?
Yeah. My question is any of these projects sponsored by the German government?
Not directly. This is the reparations funds, and they are German funds, but they're managed by an organization that is both American, German, so they are German money that are the reparations, and that is some of the issue that this one client was saying. Well, this money was meant for us, and she was saying, I need more homekeeping, a maid service, and I'm told that there's not enough funding for to increase my maid service. So how come the Germans are, I'm not resentful for the Germans, this was really paradoxical. They paid, but why isn't the organization giving me the money that I need for taking care of my basic needs? She strongly expressed that she was resentful, as you saw, of that. Yeah. I,
What was the origin of the Jews of color? How did you select them? How did you find them? And how did they find you?
okay. The Jews of color was a convenience sample that we worked with the Jews of color, which is an initiative, and through snowballing from them, we tried to get a national sample that represented the diversity of the Jews of color. Maybe this is an opportunity to...
But I don't understand. If you could tell us from what countries did they come from, and how did they get to know about you, and how did you get to know about them?
We got to know about them through the Jews of Color initiative. That's how we got to know about them. So, like I said, it was a convenience sample. You want to know the countries that they came from? Okay, let me go to that. So here's the family of origins. Yeah.
Thanks. When you mentioned Jews of color, there's a group called Jutina. Are you familiar with Jutina?
No, I'm not. Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
That's Latina Jews, because I have a friend who's involved, 2 friends or 3 friends who are involved with it because they have Latina roots.
Right.
One is actually living in South America, and her father, who's probably in his 60s, lives there now, and they come from there, but they didn't come from Latin America originally.
Right.
So they are considered Jews of color.
That's right. And they're Ashkenazi, but they self-refer and identify as a Jew of color.
Right. And I also, just to include for a variation, I met someone who was adopted. He is not originally Jewish, but he was adopted by a Jewish family here in the Valley, and he went to discover his roots and found out he has Latina roots.
Yeah.
And he is now the director of Jutina, the group Jutina.
Oh, yeah.
So it's fascinating. Yeah.
So, yeah, the diversity within that, yeah.
I was a prisoner of the Japanese for 3 years, from age 5 to 8 in Shanghai.
Yeah.
So I'm a survivor.
Yeah.
And some of the things that you said applies to all of us, the people that I know. We never got any reparations whatsoever, and never any treatment. But my daughter, who's is a social worker, she says that the trauma comes down to the kids no matter what. There is the thing about hoarding food and things like that. We always worry that there won't be enough. And but I've made a great life. I've lived in 5 countries, and I'm strong because of it. But I think that I was too young, and I want to know at what age is the young age that you don't get affected, that you mentioned. 5 years old?
5 years old is
Aware.
5 years old, but as up until, say, puberty or 12 years old. 5 years old, you're pretty well protected from the trauma.
Until age 8. But what helped me was that I wrote a book about it and shed everything in the book. So I interviewed my parents and got the information.
And what did you find?
Well, I found out later in life that my parents were going through a lot in their 30s, and we were kids. We didn't understand what their fear was. But that fear, it worked itself down into me. I have a fear of authority and all kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, that's,
Yeah.
that's the point of the intergenerational transfer. Any other?
Yes. Okay, so my first cousin, once removed, okay, our mothers were first cousins. And her mother, my cousin, her name is Trudy. That's Trudy's parents, her older brother, and she managed to get out of Vienna, like on the last train or whatever it was. And the family that remained, her grandparents, pulled all their money together and got them to England. The British wouldn't accept them really because they didn't have enough money to come in. So they were incarcerated on the Isle of Man. Now Trudy was, how old was she went to the Isle of Man? She was probably 1.5 and 2. Her older brother was about 3 or 4. And then there was another child, her brother, was born on the Isle of Man while they were incarcerated. Now, Trudy doesn't remember really that much when they were incarcerated because she was too young. But living with her parents, even when they managed to get sponsored after the war to come to the United States in the late 40s, she has been traumatized because she was living with her parents.
Yeah.
So it isn't that she remembers what happened. And her brother, who was an infant, he doesn't remember anything, and he was most grossly traumatized. Trudy gets reparations from the German government. And she has a person, now she's in her 80s, and she has somebody that comes twice a week, paid by the German government, and the people that distribute the funds and find the housekeeper, I don't know if it's Federation or just some Jewish organization. She lives in New Jersey. But she is traumatized because she lived with her parents who were traumatized themselves and would relay all the things that happened to them. So I don't think you have to be 5 years old. I don't think that's right because she may have finally recognized what was going on in her home when she was older. So I don't think that holds.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, yeah. Yeah, and that's, I'm glad you brought this up because when I answered that question, I was thinking only of the age of the Holocaust survivor themselves. When does the effect really occur? But this highlights the importance of having services and trying to deal with the children of these Holocaust survivors because the transfer takes place, as you have just described. So, any more questions on this? How much time do we have now? About a minute. Oh, well, maybe I can just quickly, because of the Jews of color, didn't spend enough time on this, of course. But the pathways, conversion by marriage is one pathway. And then self-referencing is the other pathway. A person decides that they're Jewish in some way, and there's multiple ways of doing that, so I didn't break those down, but that gives you what's important in this model that I showed earlier. This was So this is sort of the whole issue of the Jews of color is, sorry, thank you. The whole issue, if the political issue of the Jews of Color initiative is being included in the Jewish community. So becoming a member, belonging to a Jewish community, an inclusive Jewish community is the end of the process. But it starts with the family of origin, and we saw the complexities of Ashkenazi Jews who migrated to Argentina and then are seen as Latino. You know, you mentioned that case, but there are many different interesting variations in the family of origins, which one of the slides I showed. And then the journey was the self-referencing. But the heart of the matter is the exclusive Jewish community experiencing a lot of discrimination in exclusive Jewish communities, which were defined as being primarily Ashkenazi, being primarily Yiddish speaking, and then coming in and then being felt othered and feeling separate. And then from that othering, the Jews of color identity emerges. And often there's an intersectional, and then eventually belong to communities. So formally, exclusive Jewish communities become inclusive more consciously, or new Jewish communities, renewal Judaism comes into being. So the model explains this, and this is just to sort of end it quickly. Here's one voice from Gil, who is a Chinese American male who converted because of marriage, and what was his experience in feeling othered. So he starts out with the experience of having his wife's brother come and try to talk him out of getting married, and the mother rejecting it, not going to the wedding. But then when the children come, there's a reconciliation, and they live happily ever after, so to speak. But that's one example of what these interviews said about feeling separate. The Jewish identity, this is another one we haven't talked about, the Persian American. In LA, we know we have a very huge Persian population. And what's very interesting is the dynamic is that they would, the older generation, they would never, and when she was part of the older generation, would they ever call themselves Jews of color? Well, they see themselves as white even when the world doesn't see us as white. That's what's fascinating to her, because she sees herself as Middle Eastern, and she passes as white because that's useful to her, but she still has a kind of an identity crisis, feeling Middle Eastern. And you can see in the Los Angeles community, you have a separation between the Persian Iranian Jewish community and the Jewish community that's primarily European Ashkenazi oriented. And she expresses this and calls herself modern Orthodox. And then here's a Mexican American converted who talks about her experience of intersectional identity. And then this was an interesting case of an African American who who converted from Protestantism and then later Catholicism to Judaism with the Kohenet movement, which is in the Jewish renewal movement, and then finds in the Kohenet a inclusive Jewish community that she had been looking for as a black African American Jew of color. So that's the presentation. Thank you.